please welcome Marianne Mariani.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been so blessed. A ripple. If you stop and think about a ripple, it has movement. We don't want to be a reservoir. We want to be a river full of ripples. And we have an opportunity to do that because it only takes one person at a time to do it. It takes one story. It takes one invitation, one opportunity to share with others what Jesus has done in our lives. He's not with us just once, right? He's with us each and every day, multiple times. Constant. And those are Jesus moments that become your Jesus story. And when I first was invited, so it took an invitation from J.K. Shea, one of our partners here at Barnabas. He invited Donnie and I to come visit a Barnabas group. And hearing what God was doing through all these ministries, I was just enamored. I'm like, oh my gosh, Lord, this is amazing. I've got to come back. So then I come back to the next summit, and I meet Jim West, as you said, the co-founder of the Barnabas group. And he says, the Barnabas mission is to take our marketplace skills and use them for ministry efforts to enhance what God is already doing in and through us for these ministries. And what do you do, Marianne? Well, I teach presentation skills to corporate America. And, why don't you come join us? And I'd love for you to maybe coach a couple people along the way. I thought, all right, Lord, that's really interesting. And that started a journey that I had no idea that 10 years later, I would have had the opportunity to participate with ministries. I feel like I'm on the inside because I hear their stories before you do. It's very fun and very enlightening and lovely. And Jim also introduced me to Kurt and to Bob Shank, who is the founder of the Master's Program. And during my time of going through the Master's Program with their leadership, God really grabbed my heart and said, you can do more with what I've put in your hand. And I thought, wonder what that looks like. So as I was pursuing helping people with their stories, more and more people at my church were asking me to help with their stories. People at women's groups were helping their stories. And I realized we all have a story somebody needs to hear, and we need to be willing to share it. And one reason we need to do that is because we need to be good stewards of what God's put in our hands. Here's the interesting thing. How many of you think about your personal faith story as being something to steward? Stewardship is really the planning and managing of resources that God's put in your hands and your hearts so that you can help people, share the gospel, and build up the kingdom. And so I want to challenge you today to be a good steward of your story and think about how you might share that with your personal sphere of influence. I believe, back to one, we all have a story that someone needs to hear. I have a story, and some of you might be interested in my story. It's in the book, all through parts of it. But some others might not. I'm going to talk to you for a moment about stories from a perspective like Kara talked about the youngest and the oldest, and how important it is. You're never too old and you're never too young to share your story. Let me start with Richard, who's sitting right over there. And Richard is a grandpa who wanted to share his faith journey, just as Kara talked about, with his grandsons. But he wasn't quite sure how to go about that. He was thinking about it, and we were talking, and an opportunity presented itself, and that was for him to have the ability to share with his men's group at church his testimony. he thought, I'll invite my grandkids, my grandsons, to hear that testimony. That was such a beautiful thing, and let me tell you why. Because he showed in that time that he shared his testimony that he was not afraid to share his faith, and that he is not afraid to share Jesus with his friends so he can encourage his grandsons to share with their friends. He also, from that, became intentional about how do I share my story. He didn't have 2 hours of time. He only had a few minutes of time, so he needed to scale that down. So he was intentional so he could be clear, concise, and conversational, because that was key. The next thing that he also helped those grandsons recognize is that it led to one-on-one conversations later. So they're like, Grandpa, I didn't know you did that, or I didn't know you did this. And it started to open doors of opportunity for conversations that he might not have had with them one-on-one had they not heard this particular testimony. Went back, shared about being a fighter pilot in Vietnam, shared about his journey along the way. It's really incredible. He is in the book. 70 plus, I'll say, I think. But not looking a day over 50, right? The other story I want to share with you is You're Never Too Young. And again, as Kara has talked about, this next generation is about relationship, not data. They don't want us to tell them how Jesus is going to fix them. They want to experience how he had relevance in your life. How does that make a difference? And so Sierra, who's here with us also today, who is 14 now, but when we started working together was 12 and a half, I want to say. And she had been through a season in her life, a challenging season that we would not predict a young person to go through, but a season of rebellion. Have we been there? Rebellion? Either ourselves or others. And in this season of rebellion, Jesus met her. And he restored her, and he redeemed her, and her life is new. And her life is just starting, as she likes to tell us. She and Jesus are buds. The cool thing about what I love is, if I were to go and talk to a group of teenagers, do you think they'd care what I'd say? Maybe a little. If she goes and talks to them and says, here's what you need to think about, because I've been there, I've done that, this is challenging, I hear what you're saying, here's how Jesus was relevant to me. That's huge. And that's because she had a story someone needed to hear, a fellow teen, or parents. Because during this season of rebellion, a lot of parents were coming up and asking, how do I have hope? What do I do? Where can I go from here? And she realized that God had put an opportunity in her lap to share her story with parents and teens that are facing some of these same things. She and Richard have two different people, they're types of people they're talking to. I do. I have stories of cancer, infertility, things of that nature. And it might not be something everyone wants to hear, but if I'm sitting across from a young couple that has been patiently waiting on God to give them a child, I can talk about the journey that I went through. And as a result of that, their faith may grow, and God's going to meet them in that. And so each of us has someone who needs to hear your story. It might be one person, might be a small group, like Richard got to talk to a group of men at their church, or it might be on the larger stage. And I'm going to share one last story with you. And that is Chow, who's right there. And Chow is the top performer in her industry, financial services industry. And what's interesting is when someone's a top performer, people don't realize they have a backstory. They think success comes easy, that there's no hurdles to have. But Chow, not only coming from Vietnam as a young person, had a lot of hurdles in her life. And as God grew her through that, and as she passed through some of the valleys, he showed her what was possible, and she started to see what was possible for her clients. So she and I talked. She had been asked to speak in front of 300 financial services experts. She wanted to share her faith, and this was an industry conference. She thought compliance wasn't going to allow it. She thought the mic didn't get turned off, but they did. Or they didn't, I should say. They didn't turn it off. They allowed her to speak. And as a result of her sharing how important her faith was to her journey and how it helps her be a better financial planner, she was sharing in the words of this financial group how they could be better with their clients and how important God is in their life. After the standing ovation, she had men coming up in tears saying, I hadn't thought of it that way. She changed their perspective of what success looks like, and it's not just in the numbers. It's in the relationships. In my book, there are 30 stories of people like the 3 I just mentioned. And so I wanted to share, and God had put on my heart to share. We're all so unique. We all are so created beautifully in God's image that we need to embrace our uniqueness and share it. And so I wanted to share a wide variety. I've got a gang leader in here. I've got a ministry leader. The Panther Brothers, some of you know them from Young Life example. So wide variety, because we need to embrace that. Not every idea in this book is going to work for everyone, but every idea has its time and place with someone who could benefit from that. And I just praise God that he allowed me to be on the journey with this that started here at the Barnabas Group, was nurtured through relationships at the master's program. And the people in this book, God bless them, they allowed me to use their stories. And let me tell you, they're not all pretty stories that someone might want in writing, including my own. But the Lord said, that's what I fix. That's what I bring to the table. I love you no matter who you are, where you've been, what you're doing, what your age. I love you. And we need to be able to share that. And I was hearing earlier mentioned that we're ambassadors for Christ. Well, let's go out and do that ambassadoring. I will leave you with one last thing. A vision that I want you to have. A sight to take your breath away. Grand processions of people sharing all the good things of God. I pray that we all can go out and share his good things with others. Thank you.